What happened when an undercover CEO stepped onto her own factory floor and saw a 5-year-old eating cereal off the ground beside a heavy press machine? Hey there, brilliant listeners. You always show up for the stories that truly matter. In today's episode, we follow Elena Whitmore's eye-opening journey from the boardroom to the assembly line, where she uncovers quiet struggles, silent sacrifices, and the human cost hidden beneath the hum of machines. This story will shift your view of leadership, dignity, and what it really means to care. Grab a seat. This one's powerful, raw, and worth every second. The hum of machines was deafening, the air thick with humidity and the scent of bleach, detergent, and damp cotton. Ella Sanders, at least that's what her badge said, tightened her grip on the scratchy cotton gloves as she stepped into the industrial laundry room of Solace Regional Hospital's Phoenix branch. In reality, she was Dr. Elena Shaw, Director of Hospital Services, a woman more familiar with boiler rooms than boiler rooms. But after months of HR reports citing manageable turnover and typical fatigue, and one particularly scathing shareholder remark about how out-of-touch leadership had become, Elena decided to find the truth herself. So she dyed her hair, left her tailored blazer behind, and enrolled as a temporary overnight hire. Now at 3:42 a.m., she stood in the middle of a place where linens were steamed, pressed, and folded in suffocating heat, watching workers move like clockwork under the weight of exhaustion. The shift supervisor, a curt woman named Nancy, handed her a crate of scrub gowns and pointed to a folding station. "You're in gowns tonight. Try to keep up." No further introduction, no training video, just sweat and motion. Elena nodded silently and went to work. She kept her head down, her ears open. Within the first hour, her back ached and her hands burned from the metal rollers. No one spoke much, just occasional grunts, the thud of soiled linens, and the mechanical sighs of giant dryers. But then, during a water break in the corner, Elena spotted something that didn't belong. A small child, maybe 5 years old, sitting quietly beside a laundry cart, drawing on a cardboard scrap and nibbling crackers from a paper towel on the floor. A little girl in a hospital laundry facility. The man next to her was slumped over, eyes red-rimmed, uniform soaked through. Elena froze. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for this. This wasn't a policy concern, this was human need, laid bare in lint and concrete. She glanced around. No one looked surprised. No one looked alarmed. As the machines roared back to life, Elena returned to her station with her mind racing. Whatever she thought this week would be, it had just changed. And it started with the sound of a Cheerio crunching under a boot. Elena waited until the next break before approaching the man she'd seen with the little girl. He was sitting on an overturned crate near the emergency exit, his head leaned back against the wall, eyes closed. The girl, now curled up beside him with her head resting on his thigh, clutched a plush bunny missing an ear. Elena cleared her throat softly. "Hey," she said, her voice cautious. He opened his eyes slowly. "I'm Ella," she offered, "new on the night shift." He gave a tired nod. "Marcus." He didn't offer more, but his eyes flicked toward the girl. "Your daughter?" Elena asked gently. "Yeah. Ava, she's 5. He rubbed his eyes and sighed. "Her sitter bailed last minute. Again, I couldn't miss another shift, so here we are." He said it with no anger, just a heavy acceptance, like someone who'd explained this 100 times already. "Her mom?" Elena ventured. "Gone, since Ava was 3. Just us now." He looked down at his daughter. "She sleeps through most of it. I bring earmuffs. Keep her in the back by the carts." He added quickly, "She never touches the machines, I swear." Elena nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "It's not safe," she said, though her tone lacked judgment. Marcus met her gaze. "It's not safe to leave her alone, either." His voice didn't rise, didn't plead. It just existed, like the rest of him, worn but standing. That moment stripped away any illusions Elena had left about acceptable conditions. She realized this wasn't about violating protocols. It was about survival, about a man who would rather risk discipline than risk losing the only thing he had left. "How long you been here?" she asked. 3 years. Full-time, nights, extra shifts when I can get them." He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, there was something behind his eyes besides exhaustion. You're not like the others. Elena blinked. What do you mean? Marcus gave a small shrug. Most people here stopped looking at us a long time ago. Then Ava stirred beside him, murmuring in her sleep, and the conversation ended. But the weight of it, of Marcus's burden, settled deep in Elena's chest. This wasn't just a man clocking in. This was a father holding a family together, with sweat, silence, and a daughter sleeping by a steam press. By her fourth night on the assembly line, Elena had begun to understand the rhythm of the plant, not just the mechanical timing of levers and conveyor belts, but the silent code between the workers who endured them. The machines never slept, never slowed. Steel clanged against steel in a relentless percussion, broken only by the buzz of intercom announcements and the occasional burst of laughter that felt out of place in the chaos. Elena, still going by her alias Ella, had learned to fall into step beside the others, matching the pace, mimicking the motions, letting the noise drown out her thoughts. But even in the noise she noticed things, the worn soles on people's boots, the way shoulders sagged by the end of hour 6, the water cooler that never got refilled, the vending machine that swallowed dollars but rarely dispensed snacks. Small details, each seemingly insignificant on its own, but together they formed the unspoken truth of the place. This was survival, not living. The workers had adapted. They covered for each other during breaks, shared ibuprofen, and swapped gloves when someone's tore. Tanya, a single mother with permanent circles under her eyes, gave Elena tips on which machines were more temperamental. Reggie, a quiet man with a stutter, showed her how to adjust the press so it wouldn't catch her sleeves. And Marcus, always Marcus, remained the axis of it all. He moved with a practiced calm, never missing a step, never raising his voice. When someone's tool jammed, he was the first to help. When Ava stirred in her makeshift nest of coats behind the pallet racks, he was there with a juice box and a soft lullaby, barely audible above the din. Elena watched him carry not just his own weight, but the crew's quiet admiration. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. Marcus was the kind of man you could lean on. Still, the cracks were widening. Tawny coughed into her sleeve every few minutes, clearly sick but afraid to call out. Reggie limped when he thought no one noticed. Elena tried to ask questions without seeming intrusive, but most of the responses were the same. It's just how it is. That sentence haunted her. Just how it is. A phrase that excused everything, from unsafe conditions to exhausted fathers bringing their daughters to work. But the rhythm of the line couldn't erase what Elena had begun to feel growing inside her. A quiet urgency, a need to shift the beat. Because if no one else was going to break the cycle, maybe she would. It happened just past midnight on a Thursday. The moment Elena would later remember as the one that shattered her last bit of emotional distance. The plant was quieter than usual, running one less line due to a supply delay. The lull gave the illusion of calm, but beneath it, fatigue was brewing. Tanya had called out sick, finally giving in to the chest infection she'd tried to hide all week. And Marcus was stretched thin, covering her station in addition to his own. Ava, normally curled in the back corner with a blanket and coloring book, was sitting upright, her cheeks flushed, eyes glassy. Elena noticed first. She abandoned her inspection clipboard and approached Marcus just as he reached for another tray of press parts. "Marcus," she said, gently but firmly, "she doesn't look okay." He followed her gaze, the concern in his eyes instant and raw. "She's burning up," he muttered, dropping the tray and rushing over to his daughter. She whimpered as he placed his hand on her forehead, then leaned against his chest like her body had given up the fight. Elena knelt beside them. "She needs to see someone tonight." Marcus looked torn, his face caught between terror and guilt. "I can't leave. If I walk out again, they'll write me up. One more and I'm done." That sentence, it broke something in Elena, not just because of what it said, but because of how defeated it sounded. She stood up and stormed toward the shift supervisor's office, not as Ella the trainee, but as someone who had finally had enough. She found Greg, the night lead, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. "We have a child out on the floor with a fever. Marcus needs to take her to a clinic now. You're not writing anyone up. You're finding a replacement or doing the job yourself." Greg looked up, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me? You don't call shots around here." Elena's voice dropped. "Then fire me, but that child isn't staying another second in this heat." The silence between them stretched, then perhaps out of uncertainty or sheer disbelief, Greg finally relented with a muttered. Marcus didn't say much as he cradled Ava and carried her out the bay door. But as he passed Elena, their eyes met. What she saw in his exhaustion, yes, but also gratitude, made the weight of her own choices settle deeper. She had come here to observe, to learn, but now the lines had blurred. Because sometimes leadership wasn't about strategy or metrics. It was about stepping in when no one else would, and Elena, for the first time, wasn't afraid to do exactly that. The next morning, Elena didn't go straight to the plant. Instead, she drove 2 miles down the road to a small urgent care clinic where she suspected Marcus might have taken Ava. Her hunch was right. Through the glass door, she saw him slumped in a waiting room chair, his shirt wrinkled from sleep, his steel-toe boots still on. Ava lay across his lap, wrapped in a thin blanket, her tiny hand curled around one of his calloused fingers. Elena hesitated before entering, unsure if she was intruding. But Marcus looked up, surprised, and gave a tired nod. "Fever broke around 3, he murmured. "They think it's just a virus, but she'll be okay." The relief was visible, but so was the exhaustion and the fear. Elena sat beside him in silence for a moment before asking quietly, "What happens now, with your job?" Marcus shrugged. "Greg didn't say anything when I left, but it'll show up, it always does. A point here, a write-up there." He looked down at Ava. "You get enough of those, and you're out. No second chances. No hearings." His voice was steady, but Elena could feel the weight behind it. Years of barely hanging on, of navigating a system that offered structure but no grace. Back at her rented apartment later that day, Elena opened her laptop, not to catch up on emails, but to dig deeper. She pulled Marcus's employee record from the database. He'd been at the Langston Tool and Die plant for 7 years, 0 formal complaints. Perfect attendance until 3 months ago, then a sudden string of tardies and 1 missed shift. That's when Ava's mother had left, Elena guessed. She traced the pay structure, the outdated family leave policy, the absence of emergency childcare support. And she saw it clearly for the first time, the cost of doing nothing. This wasn't about one man breaking the rules. It was about a system built for output, not people. A system where dedication could be punished and survival often meant compromise. Marcus had chosen safety over policy that night, and he might pay for it with his job. Elena, sitting with her head in her hands, realized something vital. If the company couldn't bend to protect its best workers when they needed help most, then maybe the company was what needed fixing, not the people inside it. The following week, Elena stood before the executive leadership team of Halcyon Forge Technologies, no longer in steel-toe boots and safety goggles, but in her usual business attire. Pressed blazer, clean lines, hair tied back in its usual polished style. But something about her presence had changed. There was a quiet fire in her eyes, a weight behind her words. As she projected charts and data across the glass wall of the boardroom, she didn't speak in abstraction. She spoke in names: Marcus, Ava, Tanya from the front desk, Jose in shipping. She recounted the night Ava sat beside a 10-ton press machine, eating cereal off the floor while her father fought exhaustion to make quota. The room grew still. "We talk about efficiency, we talk about numbers, but how often do we talk about the people behind them?" Elena asked, letting the silence stretch. "Marcus McCall has worked here for 7 years. He's never asked for anything, but when life finally pushed him to the edge, we had nothing in place to help him, not one safety net." The HR director shifted in her seat, looking down. The CFO, Paul Greaves, folded his arms, skeptical. "Are you proposing we rewrite the handbook because one guy brought his kid to work?" "No," Elena replied firmly. "I'm proposing we rewrite it because anyone could be in his shoes. And because we said we were a company that values people. That's what we tell our clients. That's what we tell ourselves. But the reality on the floor tells a different story." She shared the facility conditions, the busted vending machines, the missing PPE, the morale issues cloaked behind fake smiles and unfiled grievances. She proposed tangible steps: emergency childcare stipends, anonymous field reporting, rotating wellness officers in every major plant, a review of every employee handbook line that punished survival. It wouldn't be cheap, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be right. By the time she finished, the boardroom was quiet. Some faces were thoughtful, others resistant, but no one could deny what they'd heard. Elena hadn't just brought back data, she'd brought back the truth. And for the first time, that truth had a seat at the table. The next Monday morning, Elena returned to the Easton facility. Not in disguise, but not exactly as the CEO either. She wore jeans and a simple navy blouse, hair pulled back casually, no security escort, no clipboard. The moment she stepped onto the floor, the usual rhythm of the machines didn't skip, but the eyes around her did a double take. Marcus, midway through prepping a welding rig, froze when he saw her. His mouth parted slightly, unsure if he should keep working or come forward. Elena offered a small wave and approached him slowly. "Hi, Marcus," she said gently. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" They walked to the far end of the break area, near a vending machine that still hadn't been replaced. Elena pulled out a folded sheet from her back pocket and handed it to him. A formal confirmation of emergency childcare coverage through the company, effective immediately. "Your daughter's spot at Easton Early Learning Center is secured for the next year," she said. Marcus stared at the paper as if it might vanish. No strings, no warnings, just, "because you deserve it." He swallowed hard, his voice catching. "I don't know what to say." "You already did," Elena replied. "That night on the floor, you showed me more than any report ever could." From that moment, word spread quickly. Employees watched as Elena spent the entire shift walking the floor, talking to workers by name, asking about machines, bathroom conditions, even the kind of coffee in the break room. She laughed with Tanya at the front desk. She helped restock safety gloves with Jose. And when she passed Ava's old blanket tucked discreetly into a corner of the tool room, she paused, not with judgment, but with understanding. By the end of the day, something in the air had shifted. Not policy, yet, but possibility. For the first time in years, many workers felt like someone in power had seen them, not as cogs or complaints, but as people. Marcus, now standing straighter than he had in weeks, watched Elena leave with a quiet hope he didn't dare name. She turned back at the door and gave him a nod, one that didn't need translation. They weren't done, they were just getting started. A week later, Elena returned to the Easton manufacturing floor, this time not undercover, not as a surprise, but as herself. Yet she didn't show up in heels or a pressed suit. She wore steel-toe boots, rolled-up sleeves, and the same faded safety vest from her first day as Lena. There was no formal announcement, no cameras, no staged photo ops. She simply clocked in at 7 a.m., grabbed a pair of gloves from the supply rack, and joined the welding line with quiet familiarity. At first, the crew was stiff with curiosity, unsure how to act now that they knew who she really was. Marcus approached her cautiously, still unsure if this version of the CEO was here to observe or truly participate. "You sure you want to be back in the heat?" he asked, half joking, half testing. Elena smirked. "Only way to see what's working and what's still broken," she replied, pulling her welding hood down. As the day unfolded, so did the atmosphere. Conversations grew more natural. Marcus showed her how the rig had been patched with scrap parts, and Elena made a note to replace it outright. She helped Ava, a new line worker, adjust her gloves, and asked about her first week. When the vending machine jammed again, Elena didn't report it. She pried it open with a screwdriver borrowed from Dave in maintenance. Laughter rippled through the room. At lunch, Elena sat with the crew in the corner of the break room, where the air was warm and the microwave wheezed in protest. Over tinfoil-wrapped sandwiches and reheated noodles, they talked about more than production quotas. They talked about daycare hours, bus schedules, rising rent. And Elena didn't just listen. She asked questions, took notes, and made calls during the next break. By the end of the shift, the line felt different, not because the work was easier or the hours shorter, but because something intangible had returned: dignity. Workers started offering ideas, real, practical suggestions they'd never voiced before, and for the first time they saw someone with power willing to act on them. As Elena peeled off her gloves and dusted off her vest, Marcus handed her a water bottle and said, "It's good to have you on the line." Elena smiled. "It's good to finally be here for real." 3 weeks after her return to the line, Elena convened the very first Operations Insight Council, a panel made up entirely of frontline employees from every region where TemperTech operated. They gathered in a modest conference room at the company's main campus in Chicago, some still wearing boots, others nervously buttoning shirts they'd bought just for the occasion. No ties, no corporate jargon, just real people with real stories, sitting at a long table with notepads, coffee cups, and folded nameplates in front of them. Marcus was there, as was Ava, and 24 others who had once been invisible to the higher-ups. Elena opened the meeting simply, "You don't need to impress anyone here. You already did that when you showed up every day and kept this place running. Now, it's our turn to listen." What followed was raw, honest, and at times emotional. One worker spoke about injuries being hidden out of fear of losing shifts. Another described skipping meals to cover bus fare. Someone brought up toxic supervisors who led with volume instead of value. No one sugarcoated anything, and Elena didn't want them to. But as the hours passed, something incredible happened. Ideas began to flow. Solutions, not just complaints. Peer mentoring programs, rotating shift leads to prevent burnout, mental health check-ins. The council wasn't a formality, it was a blueprint being written in real time. And Elena, with her sleeves still rolled up, was taking notes like her future depended on it. Because in a way it did. Elena stood once more on the floor of the Ridgeway plant, this time not as a hidden observer or a stranger in borrowed boots, but as herself, CEO, leader, and student of her own company's forgotten lessons. The clang of machines still echoed through the cavernous space, and the air still held the hum of labor and heat. But something was different. The eyes that met hers now held recognition. Respect, trust earned the hard way. She stopped by Marcus's station, watching as he guided the press with steady hands and an ease that came from confidence restored. Nearby, Ava was training a new hire. Her instructions clear, patient, proud. This place would never be perfect. The work would always be hard. But now it was no longer invisible. People mattered here. Voices mattered. Elena had stepped into a world shaped by pressure, of metal, deadlines, and human struggle, and instead of breaking, she'd let it shape her too. What started as a response to a challenge from a boardroom critic had become a journey of rediscovery, not just of her workforce, but of herself. As she walked back toward the administrative wing, past the new breakroom that smelled of real coffee and fresh paint, she glanced up at a sign above the entryway. Freshly installed, made from pressed steel and etched by hand. It read, "Built together, carried together." She smiled softly. They were still pressing forward, but now, no one had to do it alone. The story of Elena Whitmore and the Ridgeway plant teaches us that leadership isn't defined by titles or polished speeches. It's proven in moments of quiet action, humility, and willingness to listen. When Elena shed her executive persona to walk the floor as just another worker, she didn't just see inefficiencies, she saw human resilience, quiet suffering, and the invisible sacrifices her employees made daily to keep the company alive. Through Marcus's burden, Ava's silence, and the small cracks in a system built for output over empathy, Elena realized that real change begins with presence. The greatest lesson wasn't about fixing machinery or boosting profits, it was about restoring dignity to the people behind the production lines. By returning not just as a boss, but as a partner in their fight for respect, she reconnected the top floor to the shop floor. The story reminds us that progress doesn't come from numbers alone, it comes from compassion, trust, and the courage to ask hard questions. And most importantly, it shows that no one should ever be forced to carry the weight of survival alone, because companies built on people must never forget the people who build them.